Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And this is the second part of our series of the VC crash test not crash test. So last week we talked about the investors ecosystem and stages of investment, and we got extensive knowledge about that from Khan and from Vijay. And this week our topic is how to pick investments. So it will be the next level from what we had last week. And Enis, who is the head of Istanbul 500 or 500 Istanbul, is going to enlighten us about the subject. He's going to talk about how to pick investments and how it sounds very different from how we might think intuitively. And he knows quite a few things about these things. And he's going to tell us how to see startups and companies when it comes to picking them. But it's not actually what I just said. It's also the person who you're picking. It's not only the startup or the idea or anything. And he's going to talk about all of this. And Enis, please take it away from here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the kind introduction, Javed. Is my voice coming nice and clear? It's good, right? Perfect. So I'll make stuff up. I'll be saying weird stuff. And if you can stop me, ask me questions, please do so. That'd be great. I feel like in venture capital, picking investments is much more of an art than science. It definitely is, which is why there are all these nuances and differences in terms of what people do. Let me share my screen. So as a fund, our whole thesis is around access to top tier talent, and it is the case for almost all the early stage investors out there. It's mostly because when you look into the unicorns, for example, we have 45 unicorns that we've invested over the past 10 years. Those unicorns make your returns. If you look into our fund one, which is a good example, one company, Carbon Health, gives us a 3x fund return in and of itself. So from that frame of mind, all of the VCs on early stage, they're looking for outlier founders and outlier companies. Your goal is not to do 3x or 5x from an investment, but rather do a 50x or 100x from an investment, which changes your whole framework of thinking while you're assessing investments. It becomes much less about the downside protection and much more about upside maximization, which is what we're doing here at 500 and what almost all the early stage investors do around the globe. Looking for last year, we've looked into more than 5,000 companies. Out of these 5,000 companies, we've had first meetings with about 1,500 of them. We've had second meetings with about 800 of them. We had due diligence and deep dives to more than 100 of them. And then we ended up investing into 10 companies. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because as you invest, both as an individual, but also from your family offices or companies that you guys have, you should be looking at thousands of deals to make sure that you're picking the best ones available out there in the market. Venture capital is much more of an access game than a picking game. And what I mean is, if you're doing public market investing, everyone has access to all the stocks. You can buy Apple, I can buy Apple. Everyone has access to all of the information out there about Apple. You can digest the information yourself, I'll digest it myself, and it becomes a picking competition. Who picks the best? If you go from public investing all the way to later stage investing, then everyone has access to information, meaning people know about the companies out there. If you're doing growth stage investment, it's not that tough to find the billion-dollar technology businesses in Germany, billion-dollar technology businesses in Turkey. These lists are already available. But to actually have access to that deal becomes the competition, because there's a lot of VC funds that look into it as well. On early stage investing, there is access asymmetry. There's also information asymmetry. You don't have information about the companies. You also don't have access to those companies. So we're competing on both of these layers. That's why it becomes very different than public market investing, which is just a picking game. Hence, you have to be looking at thousands of deals just to be able to do one deal in a given market. To be able to do that, we and all of the other funds do a lot of stuff. We do a lot of community events, founder dinners, CC nights. If you go to YouTube, you'll see my bunch of dozens of videos on YouTube where we actually spend time on it, craft it, pay money to it. It's all of an access game, right? So you have to make sure that you have access to the best founders. Hence, we do a bunch of weird stuff like founder dinners or these CC nights events where we host stuff and a couple hundred people come, etc. So all of these is there to maximize the top of the funnel, maximize the number of deals that you see as a founder. And the goal is to find the Carbon Health. So the goal is to find an outlier returner that's going to become $1 billion company. If you invest that $5 to $10 million valuation, it's going to give you that 100x return over the next 5 to 10 years. That's what we're optimizing for. And as we do deep dive, which is what I'm going to talk about today, we looked at a bunch of stuff. Like we looked for the problem and the solution, we looked at the product, we looked at the round dynamics, market and the competition, business model, the go-to-market strategy that the company has. All of these are important. And we ask a bunch of questions as we do these due diligences. We do a couple calls with the founder where we ask all of these questions. We do our own research, analysis, paralysis. We look into the public markets, see similar companies, try to understand their product futures so that we can compare and contrast. But all of these things that we do around the product, the problem, the go-to-market, etc., just feeds in to us better assessing the teams. Eventually, it's a people's business. So the reason why we're doing all of these due diligences and research onto the product or onto the market is not so that we can build conviction into the company's go-to-market strategy. It's not so that we can build conviction into the company's product. It's more so that we can get on a level where we can have a quality conversation with the founder to better assess him or her in terms of his or her knowledge. So all of these feeds into the way we assess the founders. And if we're sure of the founders, if we're 100% sure that these founders are the best in the market, they're A+ founders, then you don't need to do any of that. But chances are you're not that sure initially. Hence, you have to do your own homework so that as you do meetings, either with the founder or their co-founders or their team, you can ask the right questions to get the right answers to see how they view the world, to see their perspective into the industry they're looking into. There was one slide I wanted to come to, but it's not here. Weird. It was on my PowerPoint, and for some reason it's not here. Anyways, so all of these feed back to the team, and we're trying to assess the team better. In different companies, the product becomes more important, and in other companies, the market becomes important, the business model becomes important. It really changes, which is what I'm gonna touch upon later in the presentation. But all of this is there for us to better qualify and assess the team. And in the team, we looked for a bunch of stuff, right? We can look for complementary skill sets, commitment, grit, drive, speed, and execution. Some things can be great, some things might not be great. But I think there are two things that stand out in all of the founders that we back. A, they have domain expertise. So we're doing all this due diligence so that we can assess their domain expertise in whatever field they're in. B, it's awareness to see what they lack. A lot of the founders are great at a couple of things, and they're not the best at a bunch of other things. So that founder awareness makes them to cover those gaps that they have in their own skill sets and in their own character. So all of these questions make us understand, A, do they have the domain expertise? Are they uniquely positioned to bring solution to this market so that they can become an outlier returner? And B, do they have enough of an awareness so that they can course correct along the way? Because a lot of things won't be right. The timing might not be right, the go-to-market, the market that they're after, the product that they're building, all of these things are never right. And the founder's job is to be able to fix them along the way. And as you fix them, other stuff gets broken. So it's really important for a founder to be aware so that he or she is going to know when it's broken and be able to fix it. And companies pivot all the time. So we look for founders who can pivot. And pivoting means actually changing stuff in the business. If your go-to-market is wrong, you change it. If your geography that you're after is wrong, you change the geography. If the team that you have is the wrong team, there is no team market fit or a team product fit, you change the team. So you pivot along the way. And let me give you a vivid example of what a pivot actually means. Carbon Health, which is a $4 billion company right now, we invested into the company back in 2016, and we obviously made a great return out of it. They started as a booking.com for clinics. So the initial idea that Eren had was to become booking.com for clinics, where much like how you book a hotel through booking.com or Expedia, you'll go online and be able to book and reserve your spot in a clinic. It turns out that's not the best idea because it's really tough to integrate with the clinics. It's really tough to build the supply side of the equation. So Eren was like, hey, you know what? To be able to do this, I'll just pivot. I'll become a patient engagement solution. And what that means is I'll give a booking software for free to all these clinics. So they're going to start using my booking software. And then I'll just, once I have 10, 20 clinics in the Bay Area in California, I'll just turn this into a marketplace and people are going to be able to book as well. So he did that pivot. Didn't work out. Obviously, it wasn't the best idea, I guess. So he pivoted again. In the second year, he pivoted to he opened his own clinic in San Francisco. He said, hey, I have to open my own clinic, with actual doctors in it, so that I'll learn how to manage a clinic where I can actually take out all these obstacles along the way of my scalability. So he actually opened his own clinic in the financial district in San Francisco, where he operated for almost a year to understand what's the tech stack that they're using, what are the bottlenecks, why aren't the clinics making much more revenue, how can you actually build a product that's going to service them. So after operating the clinic for almost a year, he came with a new idea, which was the fourth pivot that he was doing. He said, hey, you know what, we're going to be launching clinics where we will be providing the end-to-end software to them, plus the hardware. And with our own software and hardware, and us being able to market the clinics that we have, we can actually have double the revenue, triple the profit per meter square compared to all these clinics in all of these areas. And fast forward 4 years, they're now a $4 billion company. So it takes 5, 6, 7 pivots to build such a great company. So that's why I'm saying the founders have to be aware of what their thesis is, so that this rapid iteration the feedback cycles are much shorter, and then they course correct along the way. Early sustainability becomes really important. I think our core advantage as a fund being from Turkey is that I can say that, oh, the development costs here are low, but in and of itself, that's not a benefit, because the development costs are low in Pakistan, the development costs are low in Nigeria. In fact, the software development costs are low in probably 180 countries around the globe. How that becomes an advantage is when you invest into companies who are able to pivot, then that becomes an advantage, because your competitors in the US, it's tougher for them to pivot, because even a pivot by itself costs millions of dollars. To be able to sustain the team in course of a couple of years would cost $1 million, not in our case. So if you're an investor in the US, if you're an investor in Western Europe, you have to bet on the right team, you have to bet on the right market, but you also bet on the right time. And timing is very critical. If you're too late, it's too late, the train is gone. If you're way too early, then for you to sustain in the market until the right time comes would take years. Not the case if you're from Turkey. If you're from Turkey targeting a Western market, you have the leverage to be way too early to the market. And if you have to sustain 3 years, 5 years, 7 years in the market until the right time comes, it's easy for you to reach early sustainability. Hence, you can pivot much more. You've reached early sustainability. You can stay in the market 3 or 5 years longer than your German or your UK or your US competitor. Hence, when the right time comes, your company is the best position. So I think compared to all the other funds, our thesis revolves more around not betting on the right teams on the right time, but betting on the right teams perhaps a bit too early than the rest of the market, because we're not scared of being too early given the lower costs that we have here in Turkey. And Twilio and Intercom are two unicorns that came out of 500 Global, out of the US fund. I think their story is really great as well, much like Carbon Health, where they were able to pivot multiple times. A company finds product market fit. For example, Twilio found product market fit through SMS marketing, because they're an API provider for SMS. Their initial product market fit was more on marketing side of things, and that gets you to a certain level, doesn't make you a unicorn. So they made a pivot. Then they targeted the two-factor authentication market, which means, you know how you try to log into something, for example, your banking account, and the bank sends you an SMS and you type in that password. That's two-factor authentication. So Twilio focused on that niche of the market, made a pivot there, found product market fit there, scaled to a certain size. That two markets, again, doesn't make you a unicorn. So they made the third pivot, and they became an end-to-end communications platform that also enables voice communication, video communication alongside with SMS. So a lot of the great companies that you see that became billion-dollar success stories, every year, every 2 years, they pivot, they continue to pivot. So they have to find product market fit multiple times along a 10-year journey to become such a big company. So while we look into these companies, in all of these companies, obviously, as I've said, it's a founder bet, but we also try to assess the market, and we try to split the world into two parts. There are some companies that are more in the blue ocean spaces, some companies that are in red ocean spaces. Red ocean spaces, as you know, are where there is a market size. You can actually assess a market. There are Gartner reports on that market. You can see some competitors. A couple of companies have actually IPO'd already, and you're betting on the fact that the team that you're backing is going to execute well, but the market's already mature. So you're scared of competition. You're taking a competitor's risk, but you're not taking a market risk because the market is already there. You can actually size the market. The blue ocean side of things, it's an early beginning of a market where there is no competition, but there's no market size. So you're taking a huge market risk. That market that you think might come up in the next 5 to 10 years might never pick up, but you're not scared of competitors. So when you were looking into a single company, whether to invest or not, we try to position on a spectrum from really red ocean to blue ocean, where do they stand? Because if it's a red ocean company, you look for different stuff. If it's a blue ocean company, you look for different stuff. And one of the unicorns that we've backed in seed, Insider is a good example of that. Insider is a marketing tech company. They do website personalization, mobile personalization, etc. It was a really, really red ocean space. While we were doing the investment back in 2016, there were already some companies who have IPO'd in the US market. There were actually 5 to 10 unicorns who were private unicorns back then. They were looking to IPO. So it wasn't a blue ocean category at all. I mean, Insider wasn't a category defining company. In fact, they were just replicating what others did in the US and the Western world. They were executing in Turkey. If you're in such a market, the best thing to do would be to execute locally, because being local becomes your core differentiation. You build the product stack accordingly, you build the team accordingly, and then after you've reached some financial maturity and a product maturity, and you feel comfortable that you can be successful, you internationalize. But while internationalizing, you can't go up the pyramid. It's very tough. You can't start in Turkey, be successful in Turkey, and then try the US, because the market dynamics are very different, because this is a red ocean market. So you try to target markets that are similar to Turkey, which is what Insider did. So they gave a conscious decision to target Eastern Europe, MENA, APAC. So these markets where the dynamics are similar to Turkey, where the Western competition hasn't come yet, and being local, being rooted into being a hyper-local company would actually become your differentiation in markets like Malaysia or Indonesia or the UAE. After they grew, they became a unicorn recently. After becoming a unicorn, they started to target the US market, because now that they've become a unicorn, they have more than $100 million in the bank. They tried to move towards the blue ocean, and they almost pivoted. So instead of becoming an end-to-end marketing suite, they've actually split off the AI part of things, because you can't, what made you successful in Turkey, what made you successful in Malaysia isn't going to make you successful in the US, and the founders were aware of that. So they built this AI product that's more of an orchestrator. They spun it out, and they're targeting the US market with much more of a niche of a solution that's only doing AI. That's how a company can grow big. And then instead of trying to grow even bigger in the red ocean market that they're already in, they try to change the narrative, make a major pivot to put themselves into a blue ocean market. So how would Insider become 10x of its current size? The answer is around AI and the US. Can the company grow another 2 to 3x, executing what they've already been doing for the past 5 years? Sure. Can they do 10x? Tough, which is why they're doing this move.
Enis, before we continue, maybe before all the questions pile up, maybe at this point we can ask our audience if they have any specific questions before we go into the other part of the subject. Does anyone have any question or would like to get some answers? Anyone? Okay.
I have a question. So first of all, thank you. My question is, I'm just wondering, is this kind of information of like what you were sharing from 500's journey of, examples of what you've invested in and so on, how public is this information for VC in general?
Good question. It's not that public because a lot of these theses you actually build retrospectively. So it wasn't like back in 2016, we sat down with my partner and we said, hey, there are red ocean, blue ocean, red ocean, let's do regional, blue ocean, let's push them to the US. It wasn't a conscious decision. It just happened to be that way. And then 2 years later, we're like retrospectively speaking, oh shit, there's a pattern here, right? And then we try to find a framework around what's actually happened. So A, it's not public. B, I don't think it's mostly not conscious. It's more retrospective, all of these. That's why before this session, I asked Gökçe and Javed whether this is going to be recorded, because, and it is. If it wasn't recorded, I can easily give you more revenue figures, fundraising figures, what was stuff, etc. But this being recorded and going public, I can't give a lot of these information.
Understood. Yeah, because I think it's still pretty. It's a good opportunity for us to get a bit more insight into, 500 being one example of VC and try to learn from that. Because I think that's. Thank you.
By the way, like different funds have different theses, right? So our thesis is to find outlier returns. So we're looking for that 100x, which is why we're doing more blue ocean investing. So, I mean, it's good that we're on this slide right now. You would see that probably 80% of our portfolio are blue ocean companies, 20% are red ocean companies. But if you look into our deal flow, it's completely opposite. 80% of our deal flow are red ocean, 20% are blue ocean. But because our thesis is to find these billion-dollar companies, we tended to over-optimize for blue ocean, which might not be the case for another early stage fund. If you talk to another early stage fund, they might be like, hey, you know what? We have a lower failure rate. And for us, success means more than 5x. If that's the case, then their thesis would be more around red ocean companies. I'm saying red ocean because those companies can commercialize faster. Finding product market fit is easier because someone has already done it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but the scalability of that product market fit has a glass ceiling.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful to actually get this. I'll stop there.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question? Okay.
Okay.
And in that case, please continue.
Right. So in these red ocean companies, you know how I said we only bet on the team and only bet on the team alone. While I was meeting with Aydin from Felicis Ventures, this was while I was taking a class at Stanford, so 2015, he gave me this framework and he said, hey, you know what? In category defining companies, in blue ocean companies, you should bet on teams at earlier stages and take a lot of bets, which is what we did. In red ocean companies, where you're actually betting on the team to be successful, you're not bullish on the market. It's not that the market is going through an inflection. It's more so that this team is going to be successful. You should wait a bit later stage, see more traction, and then pile up your money into just one company or one team. So in red ocean companies, we tend to do larger tickets at later stages so that we see more metrics and into one or two companies. Whereas on blue ocean, we're doing much more of a early stage team bet and then a lot of tickets because you don't know which of these markets are going to pick up. You don't know which of these markets are actually on the ripe of disruption. So coming back to this slide, the framework that I'm going to give you is the more the red ocean a company is, the more later stage we invest. Hence, we ask more questions around product, traction, revenue, growth, etc., which is I'm going to come to. On the blue ocean companies, we tend to do less of that, and we're much more focused on the team and the team alone. In red ocean companies, we look for more execution capabilities and executional success because it's easier to commercialize, it's easier to build a product, it's easier to sell that product, and it's easier to show initial results compared to these more nascent markets. So we start asking for traction, right? We start asking for metrics into these companies. So what's a good metric? For us, a good metric would be chronological. So it has to be time series. It has to be per week, per month, per day. It can't be total sales because total sales is only an ever increasing figure. It can't be total downloads because total downloads is again, ever increasing figure. It doesn't go down. And we try to look into a bunch of stuff. We try to look into unit economics, growth metrics, cohort analysis. For example, people who came last month compared to the previous month, how are their engagement are changing, etc. So unit economics becomes very important, and I'm trying to. I had our analyst to reshuffle the slides that I already had. I guess she took off some of the slides, so my narrative doesn't make sense, and I haven't gone through this presentation for the past 3 years, so whatever. In some companies, which we're much more unit economics driven, meaning unit economics matter a lot, and we're looking for unit economics. In other metrics, in other companies, we're much more stickiness oriented, which is retention and churn. So, and I'm going to come to that. So some companies are much more financially and transactionally driven. At every transaction, you have to be turning a profit from the get-go. Other companies, profits come after 5 years, or even margins come after 5 years. So we're less oriented into that, and we're much more looking into customer adoption, stickiness, retention, and things like that. So what is unit economics? Unit economics, there are two parts of unit economics. There's the customer acquisition part, and then there's the lifetime value part. On the customer acquisition part, we're trying to understand what a single customer costs to a business. And there are two ways to look into it. For example, if you've paid $100 and you had 100 customers last month, you can say, hey, I'm paying $1 a customer. But then what we ask is, for that $100, how many customers actually came and how many of them came organically? If 99 of them came organically and then just one of them came from that $100 campaign that you've made, then perhaps your scalable customer acquisition is $100. It's not $1. So we try to understand inorganic customer acquisition cost because that's scalable. It's tough to scale the organic part. It's very easy to scale the inorganic part. You just increase marketing and it scales. So we try to find scalable customer acquisition cost while we take everything that's non-scalable, whether that's PR or organic growth, etc. apart. And that becomes one part of the equation. That's how much you spend to get one customer. The second part of that equation is the lifetime value. So how much are you going to earn from that customer? If this is a transactional model where you're selling t-shirts, then it's easy. You sell a $100 t-shirt, you have $50 margins, voila, you made a $50. But as this turns more into a subscription-based business, where you're charging someone on a monthly basis, then you have to build all these assumptions into place. How long is this person going to stay as your customer? 15 months, 20 months, 30 months? Why? Which brings us to churn. And churn is the rate that you're losing customers. Is it 1% per month, 10% per year? We try to understand the churn mechanism of that business and compare it to different companies who have similar business dynamics that are public. For different companies, 5-year lifetime can be great. For others, even a 2-year lifetime can be great. But we try to see how long the customers are going to stay with that product, and then get that monthly contribution margin to be multiplied by that lifetime. So we're not looking at revenue. And there are a couple of things to look at. So GMV is gross merchandise value. If you're Uber and a ride costs $50, that $50 is not Uber's revenue. It's Uber's GMV, gross merchandise value. If Uber takes 20%, for example, off of that $50, that $10 is Uber's revenue. If Uber is spending 2-3% on payment commissions, etc., then what's left of that $10, let's say $8, is the contribution margin. So we're trying to get lifetime value from contribution margin, not from revenue, not from GMV, but actually from the actual gross profit that the company makes. And then we attach a churn pattern, and there are different churn patterns for different businesses. Some companies have a constant churn, which means they're losing 2% every month. It's constant, perfect. But some companies have cliff churn patterns, so they lose a lot in the first month or in the first 2 months, and then they don't lose a lot of customers. A lot of companies are like that. So we try to assess what kind of a churn pattern this company is going to have to actually project the lifetime value of the customer, and then compare that lifetime value to the customer acquisition cost. So the reason that I told you all about this unit economics is, for example, investing into SaaS businesses, most of the times, we're much more unit economics driven than anything else. We look into lifetime value over customer acquisition cost, and that's our core metric. Because all of the SaaS companies have some different lifetime value over customer acquisition cost metrics, but it is really important. So for us, a healthy customer acquisition cost, a lifetime value over customer acquisition cost, is more than 3x. For good companies, that's 5, 6, 7x. If it's less than 3x, that raises question marks. If it's less than 2x, it raises even more question marks. We look for negative churn. And what negative churn means is, for example, let's say April 2022, I got 100 customers whom I make $100 from. A year from now, so April 2023, maybe 10% of these customers have churned. So you can say that, hey, you know what? You have a 10% yearly churn mechanism. So out of these 100 customers, you only have 90 left. But what if I'm making, instead of $100 from 100 customers, what if I'm making $150 from these 90 customers? What that means is, although I'm losing logos, although I'm losing companies, I'm upselling to the existing customers even faster. And if you look into different SaaS companies in the public markets, you would see that negative churn mechanism in place, which means even if they fired all of their sales personnel, even if these companies end up with 0 sales personnel, they would still be increasing their revenue because their upsell percentage is even higher than their new customer growth. So we try to find companies with negative churn. And on SaaS, growth equals burn because of the payback period. So whatever marketing dollar you spent today, even if it's just $1, when are you taking that back? And that's your payback period. The longer that is, the more capital you would need. For us, a healthy payback period, again, it really varies from industry to industry, but if it's 6 months to 8 months, then great for you, but you're not pushing hard enough. You have to be more aggressive. You have to be spending more and stretch that to perhaps 12, 15 months. That would fuel your growth even further. If it's 18 to 24 months, your payback period, then you're almost not profitable. You have to take that down to 12 to 15 months. And in a lot of the SaaS investments that we do, we try to play around these. So we try to push for growth, increase CAC, payback period increases, and then we're like, oh, wait, now we have 18 months payback period. It's too long. We have to self-adapt. And then we take the gear down, we slow down, we get the payback period back to 6 months, and we play around with it to understand the elasticity of payback period compared to growth and compared to customer acquisition cost.
Enis, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I was wondering, now up until this point, this is a lot of data-driven information. And one question I have is, because in the beginning you told us that this is at a certain point, this is an access game. For example, you have a promising startup or promising business model, something has come up, and then and you're going to pick the investment. But then, if this is an access game, sometimes I think you may not have the best available time to you. This is what I mean. For example, you are aware of you become aware of this investment, of the potential, and then you have to do the move very quickly. And how does this turn out? I mean, because all this information maybe is intuitive for you now because you've been doing it for this for a while. But is it like I don't know? I don't think you plug this into Excel file and everything comes out. But how long does it take you to assess this, or how many man hours? I don't know. What would be the good metric or a good way of expressing how this all information is digested in a way, if you need to do this in a hurry?
Yeah, first of all, like in more blue ocean companies, which are earlier stage for us, we tend not to ask a lot of these because it's not there. There are no answers because there's no revenue. We ask more on these on red ocean companies. And then again, the reason why we're asking these is to better qualify the team. So we're trying to have an intelligent conversation with the team to see how data driven they are. How well do they track all of these? So it's less about us assessing the business. It's more about us assessing founders using the business and its metrics as a vehicle to better assess the founders. And even after the first meeting, so talk to any of our investment personnel within the team, after the first meeting, if this company has even $5,000 of monthly revenue, we ask for metrics. And the reason why we ask for metrics is first to see how they're looking into it. Do they actually have all of these tools set up so that every month they can see how many customers they got, lifetime value, customer acquisition cost, their engagement, etc. And we kind of project onto that. Sometimes as we speak with a company, we see that their lifetime value over customer acquisition cost has to be more than 3x, but it's not. And then we go into this more deeper conversation as to why the case that is. It's again to assess the founder. So it's not like we don't invest. It's more like we're trying to understand whether the founder awareness and executional capability is there. But much like what you said, in hot deals, you don't have 2 weeks to assess. You have like 4 days and 3 meetings. So what we do is we kind of congested. Rather than like one person doing one meeting and the other person doing the second meeting in 2 weeks, you don't have that much time. We do first meeting, second meeting, third meeting, like 3 days in a row. And to be able to build that, we built a mechanism. We put some resolutions in place where like after including and after the second meeting, every single meeting is with a decision maker. So with us, with our fund, you won't be having 3 meetings with an associate or a principal. No. You would be having the second meeting onwards with a GP present so that we can pull the trigger whenever we want to. Other funds don't do it like that, but for us to shorten our decision-making cycle, that's one of the resolutions that we got. The second resolution was nothing can be, so our call to actions has to be 5 days. If someone did the meeting today, in the next 5 days, we have to have a call to action. If it's more than 5 days, we just kill the deal. So a deal shouldn't be hanging on our CRM for 20 days with no next step. There has to be a next step. If there's no next step, then it's a no-go. We just kill it. So we try to fasten screening 5,000 deals, you have to put these mechanisms so that it becomes almost a factory trying to produce stuff.
So basically it sounds like you have because you have a knowledge and everything, there's like a kind of a scenario fit for almost any situation. If this is a hot deal and you have to do this in a certain way, then those the things you just said kick in. Otherwise, if you have more time, then you have more time. You can relax a bit and then do the other stuff in between and everything. But so you do have a plan for these kind of things. All right.
Yeah. In the meantime, can I stop sharing and then start sharing the PowerPoint so that I don't know which slides were gone, but might as well we can go over them.
Please do. While that that's happening, if you need to take a break, if anyone needs to go to the bathroom, I'm sure all the people who don't have the videos on, they're already in the bathroom, but otherwise, other people.
Perfect. Now I'm good.
Okay, can we continue?
You can see everything full screen, right?
I can. I hope everyone.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. So this was one of the slides that was gone. So we say there are 4 T's. There's the target market, team, technology, and traction. And depending on what the company does, one or the other becomes more important. So in blue ocean companies that we back, it's mostly team, and nothing else has any weight whatsoever. I mean, the more red ocean the company gets, the more traction we look for. The more deep tech the company gets, the more technology we look for. So it's more of a Ford diagram where a lot of the more earlier stage you go, the team gets more weight. The later stage you go, other things get more weight because now you can actually validate the team through all of these things. So this was SaaS. Nothing changed because when you say view, all of these things are gone. Sorry. So what's a good metric? This slide was gone. That's why I wanted to show you. We also split the world into two things: unit economics and retention and engagement. And I just told you about the unit economics a couple of minutes ago. The second thing that we look for is retention and engagement. And what retention and engagement means is how much do people use your product? Are they actually using the product? And this can be looked at by various perspectives. So it can be daily active user, weekly active user, monthly active user, total number of downloads, their percentages compared to each other. So out of the total downloads, how many of them are monthly active? Out of all the monthly active users, how many of them are daily active? How is that figure changing over time? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? There's 1 to 7 to 30-day retention. So if 100 people come to my app today, how many of them are going to come tomorrow? How many of them are going to come on day 7, day 30? So all of these things are more related to stickiness than financial metrics. And as we look into companies, in SaaS, we're very much unit economics driven. So it's all about the finances. It's all about lifetime value over customer acquisition cost, growth, payback period, etc. For other types of companies, we're much more retention and engagement focused. So we were looking for this stickiness. And to look for stickiness, we have curves like this. For example, in this graph that you're seeing right now, there are different cohorts for different users. And you can see that, for example, for this cohort, which was 2014, whenever, from first month to second month, it dropped from 100% to 67%, and then all the way down to 55%. We compare this to the next one. So this red one is the next cohort. You can see that the product is improving. So although month 1 retention was 67%, it went all the way up to 70%, and then all the way up to 77%. So through these metrics, we can see A, is the product improving? B, is the company able to attract customers that are more relevant to it? So these are all the ways we look into retention and engagement. Another good visualization would be through a table. So here you can see different weeks in 2014, number of users, and then you can see what percentage of these users come back on week 1, week 2, week 3, and how does that change over time. So the week 1 retention out of a span of 2 months has increased from 14% to 17% in this case, for example. So these are just different ways to visualize what's happening. So as I've said, in SaaS, we're very much unit economics focused. And apart from that, we're also looking for hockey stick growth. So SaaS companies, because they're burning money, they have to be growing fast. And a rule of thumb would be growing 3x for 3 years and then 2x for another 4 years. And if you do the math, starting with a couple thousand dollars MRR, monthly recurring revenue, even if it's $5,000, growing 3x for 3 years consecutively, and then 2x then on, actually makes a really good growth curve for the company. And eventually, as we do these equity investments, the end of the life cycle is an IPO. So you either invest in companies who are going to IPO, or these companies get acquired by companies who have actually IPO'd, or these companies get acquired by companies who are going to get acquired by companies who have IPO'd. So the end of the value chain is the public market. So as you invest, we try to see from a revenue multiples perspective, where are we investing at? And if this company can grow 3x, 9x, 10x, whatever in the next couple of years with that new revenue figure and the current revenue multiple, what would their valuation be? Which is why I put this graph over there. The reason why we're looking to that is Salesforce is a good example of that. Salesforce acquired a bunch of companies, and they're more swallowed companies because their revenue multiple was so high that they were trailing at 20x annual revenue multiple, so that they can swallow companies at 10 to 12x revenue multiples. And the more companies they swallowed, their valuation also increased over time. And once you get into that dynamic, it's much more easier for you to sell the company to a guy like Salesforce. So that's why we try to understand in SaaS companies at what multiple are we investing, and then 2 years from now, if the company successfully grows its revenue, what valuation would it be trailing at if we try to sell the company? It kind of limits your downside and better validates the valuation that you put attached to the company. In social or mobile companies, and I would put gaming here as well, we're much more stickiness and retention and engagement focused. So we care less about finances, we care less about revenue or unit economics or customer acquisition cost, but we care much more about monthly active user figure. How is that growing? How is the weekly active user over monthly active user percentage growing? So if there are 1,000 people who are monthly active, how many are weekly, how many are daily active, and how is that changing over time? We look at 1, 7, 30-day retention figures. We look at network effects, and the best way to understand network effects is such that, so what network effect means is the more users there are, the more value the product gives to new users. So the new users end up staying longer. A lot of the companies, their retention would decrease by cohort because initially you get the early adapters, and as you go to early majority, their retention, their stickiness wouldn't be as well as early adapters. And same goes for example, weekly active user over monthly active user percentage. It wouldn't be as high, it would go down. But for companies with network effects, it would go up because the more users there are, the more benefit and value is created through the platform, the more people ended up staying on a daily or a weekly basis. I think a great example of that is Facebook, where there's a really cool story with Mark Zuckerberg. While he's trying to close a deal from Sequoia, he looks onto his phone and says, we just got a 50% daily active user over monthly active user percentage, which means out of everyone who was active on Facebook on that month, 50% of them were also active on that one day. It's an amazing figure to track. And in a lot of these social mobile gaming companies, we look for these figures initially. We don't look for financial metrics or unit economics. E-commerce businesses are much more transactionally driven. So in a lot of the e-commerce businesses that we look at, we're looking for unit economics. But since this is not SaaS, this is not subscription-based revenue, they have to be profitable at every single transaction. So we can't just assume that I'm going to do 20 transactions from the business. It has to be profitable. Even me doing one transaction alone, its gross margins have to be recouping my customer acquisition cost. And the reason why we do that is because e-commerce is really paid acquisition heavy, and companies have to retarget and remarket to the same user over and over again. I mean, imagine how many times you've used Amazon or eBay or Trendyol in Turkey. You still see their advertising, you still see their marketing, you still click on it. So they try to win you over and over again throughout the lifetime. It's not like you become loyal. So loyalty in e-commerce is tough, which is why they have to do remarketing and retargeting all the time, which is why they have to be transactionally profitable at every single transaction, which is what we look for. So to become transactionally profitable, gross margins become very vital, because even with that one transaction of me buying a t-shirt, the company has to be turning a profit, which is why direct-to-consumer models have grown over the past 5 to 7 years. Even a giant like Trendyol, which is the Turkish Amazon, ended up doing its own brands where they have 70% gross margins because it's their own brands. A good example in the US is Bonobos or Honest. And there's been a lot of M&A in the space where guys like Walmart ended up acquiring a couple of direct-to-consumer companies because of the channel that they built with the customers. Marketplaces are more complex. So in marketplaces, there are two sides. There's a supply side, there's a demand side, and we try to treat all of them separately as separate businesses. So we try to treat this as if this is not just one business. These are two separate businesses, one servicing the supply side, one servicing the demand side. And from that perspective, there are different LTV over CACs, there are different unit economics for both sides. A lot of the good marketplace models have only one bottleneck. It's either the supply that's a bottleneck or the demand that's a bottleneck. For example, with Uber, there's a good story where demand was just flowing in, but they weren't able to ramp that up with supply. So there weren't enough people who wanted to become Uber drivers. Hence, the Uber team spent all of its marketing into acquire more drivers, not more users, because users were just flooding in. So from a business leverage perspective in marketplaces, it's either one or the other that becomes a bottleneck, and then the company just channels whatever cash they have onto that one part of the equation on the marketplace. And in a lot of these marketplace models, supply is built. So the sole purpose of supply is to be available on that marketplace. And let me give this as an example. Although Uber's claim was that, hey, you can drive 2 hours a day and make extra cash, it didn't end up that way. People actually quit their jobs to become Uber drivers. Same with Airbnb. Although Airbnb said, hey, you have an empty room, rent it on Airbnb and make extra revenue. No, currently a lot of the houses are bought to be put on Airbnb. So you actually have full availability of that supply in and of itself. And you would see this in effect in a lot of the marketplace models, even in food delivery marketplaces like Yemeksepeti, where restaurants are getting opened just to deliver food, and their sole purpose of existence is to be available on Yemek Sepeti. We like to see that mechanism in place. So while we look into a marketplace model, we try to see what percent of the supply is actually with you. So if the supply only makes a small amount of money from you, the chances are it's really tough to manage them. But if you become the supply's only source of demand, you're their only source of making money, then you can easily play around, increase the quality of the supply, etc. A lot of the good marketplace models target fragmented markets with high frequency and very tough to crack because it's a discovery problem. And let me substantiate that with an example. For example, if I'm going to Barcelona tomorrow, where can I stay? There are thousands of houses, so it's a very fragmented market. Number of places that I can stay in Barcelona, thousands of houses, very fragmented. It's really tough to discover. I don't trust because I don't know the landlord, I don't know the owner of the house. Anything can happen to me. The service is not standardized. I'm not sure about the quality. Hence, it's really tough for me to discover that owner of the house for me to stay in. And Airbnb solves all of that. So Airbnb standardizes the quality of the service, acts as a trust mechanism, as an escrow, solves my discoverability problem to a marketplace. Hence, it's able to get a part of the transaction. It's able to get 10% from me, couple percent from the host, etc. In a lot of these marketplace models, there's also a chicken and egg problem, meaning you have to ramp up demand to ramp up supply or vice versa. So if you want to launch Uber in a city like Istanbul, you need at least a couple thousand drivers to start. You can't start with 10 drivers because the marketplace liquidity won't be there. This is the case for almost all the marketplace models. So obviously this chicken and egg problem changes depending on the model. For example, if you're trying to launch a house cleaning service in Istanbul, you can start with 10 cleaners because it's not instant, it's bookable. But if you're trying to do Uber in Istanbul, you need 1,000 drivers. And to solve that, what companies do is they subsidize one part of the equation. So for example, what Uber did back in the day in the US was they said, hey, as long as you have the app open, we'll just pay you. So it was subsidizing supply to make the supply always available, and that was pushing for demand. Same with a lot of the cleaning marketplaces. So cleaning marketplaces, what they do is they just buy full-time supply. So they actually hire the cleaners fully, have their calendars fully controllable, pay it up front because they're salaried workers now, and then try to ramp up demand. So to overcome this chicken and egg problem, you have to subsidize one part of the equation and then test the other part. In marketplace models, to look into lifetime value, there's a term called GMV, which is gross merchandise value. So if I'm paying $1,000 to Airbnb, that because I'm going to Barcelona, I don't know why I'm saying Barcelona, I guess I love Barcelona. That $1,000 that I've spent to Airbnb is not Airbnb's revenue, it's its GMV. And if Airbnb is taking 13%, 10% from me, 3% from the host, that 13% is the take rate, and the $1,000 times the 13% is the actual revenue that it's making. And while you look for LTV over CAC for both sides of that equation, you have to take into account the actual revenue, the actual profit margin that Airbnb has from that single transaction. And Airbnb and Uber are very separate businesses when you compare them, because both of them are operational marketplaces, meaning the transaction happens offline. There's actually a person who's physically going to Barcelona and staying in a house, or there's actually a driver who's coming to pick me up and take me to the airport. So both of them are operational marketplace models, but they're very different when you compare them, because in Uber, the buyer is local, the rider is local, the driver is local, the transaction happens locally. Hence, it's much more of a hyper-local marketplace compared to Airbnb, where the traveler can be from Istanbul, the house can be in Barcelona. Next thing you know, the traveler is going to be in Istanbul, the house is going to be in Japan. It's much more global. So Airbnb being global adds a lot of value to the network, because you can use Airbnb wherever you go and you're frequently traveling. You're traveling once every 3 to 6 months. Not the case with Uber. Uber, you're using in your hometown 90 to 95% of the time, which is why a lot of the Uber competitors were able to beat Uber. So if you look into Grab in South Asia, it was to beat Uber. If you look into Didi in China, Careem in Middle East, these companies who were much more hyper-local were able to beat Uber because of that hyper-local dynamic. Not the case with Airbnb. It's much tougher to crack because it's a global marketplace, whereas the other one is a hyper-local marketplace. And lastly, before we close on marketplaces, in marketplaces, we either have low frequency, high ticket size, or high frequency and low ticket size. And giving an example, Airbnb, for example, is low frequency. You probably an average user uses Airbnb once a year. but they're paying a couple $1,000s to stay in Barcelona, and Airbnb is making hundreds of dollars off of it. So it's low frequency, high ticket size. And I guess a good example of that is JetSmarter. It's a jet booking marketplace where like frequency is once in a lifetime, but once you pay $10,000, right? Uber or all these food delivery marketplaces are the different dynamic, where it's high frequency. You order a couple times a week, 3 times, 5 times a week, but you're only paying $10, $20, $30 while you're making a couple dollars each time. So it's really high frequency, low ticket size. The worst marketplaces are low frequency and low ticket size. So we tend to stay away from them. So we try to find marketplaces who are either low ticket size, who are either high ticket size or high frequency, but lack thereof, we kind of stay away from the company. And hardware. So in hardware, a lot of the business models are more software enabled. So although when you look into a company, you can say, hey, this is a hardware company, it's actually not, which is what we tend to do as well. For example, let's go with Apple. Apple is better than Tesla. I guess I'm an Apple maximalist. For example, Apple, although it might seem like a hardware company, up after 2015, if you look into their quarterly earning reports, they have been highlighting software revenue. And to push for software revenue, they've been pushing App Store, getting great, like 30% rate from all of the App Store transactions. They've been promoting iTunes. They've been promoting Apple Podcasts. They've been promoting Apple Pay. So after 2015, because the revenue through hardware can't grow as fast, Apple almost made this complete pivot to become a software company, where obviously it sells you the device and makes a lot of money off of you, but it continues to make money off of you through all of these software services. And initially, while iPhone 1 was just launched, Apple was able to sell you a phone every 1 year or 2 years. So it was high frequency. You buy the same product from the same company over and over again. But then as the innovation curve kind of slowed down, it became tough. It became tough to sell iPhone 7 to an iPhone 6 user or an iPhone X to an iPhone 8 user. That time span of you buying a new phone became from 1 to 2 years to 5 to 6 years. Hence, Apple made this huge pivot. Same would go for Peloton, for example. Peloton, which sells these bikes, although it might seem like a hardware company that's selling bikes, what it does is after you buy the bike, you pay about $40 a month to get a hold of that content. And this subscription revenue now makes majority of their revenue because it's almost 100% gross margin. So all of these companies who might seem like hardware from apart are actually software companies. So InnoFab Health is one of our portfolio companies. So they do these smart spirometers. And initially you might think, hey, it's a hardware company. It's selling this hardware to people with respiratory diseases like COA or asthma. Well, how we actually make money is A, we're getting a lot of subscription revenue from our channels, from clinics or insurance companies. B, we own that data, much like a clinical research organization, so that together with our inhaler product, we can actually easily sell that data to pharma companies. So although the hardware is an enabler for us to get a hold of that data, the core business model of the company is through the software that it builds around the product. So we say these are hardware-enabled software companies. You need the hardware as an enablement so that you get a hold of that data or you get a hold of that user. But then after you give him or her the phone, you start making revenue through the software. And if you look into a lot of the VC investments in the hardware space, a lot of them would be in that dynamic where you sell the hardware and then you make money off of the software. Some companies are not like that. For example, Widdings is a good example that's not like that. Widdings was a smart home device company. And so I think a good hardware company with only a hardware business model should be able to sell the same device to the same customer over and over again, which is what Apple was able to do until 2015. Widdings tried that by selling a new product to the same customer over and over again. So they were doing smart camera, then they did smart weight machine. They did all of these home appliances, but they were subpar in a lot of these categories because it's tough to be the best at all of these categories. You have competitors all around the place, and hence they stumbled a lot. So if you look into a lot of the VC investments that are hardware, you would see that there's a big software play in place. That also includes Tesla, by the way, obviously. If you look into Tesla's software updates and how it's able to sell these software updates to people who have already bought a car, it easily shows that this is a software play rather than a hardware play. So as a fund, our goal is to create global success stories from locally incubated teams. And Should I tell these? Okay, I'll just tell this. We believed in this thing called the population paradox. And what population paradox meant about 10 years ago was countries with lower populations, like Estonia, like Israel, like Denmark, like Netherlands, were able to create more unicorns than countries with much higher populations like Germany, Italy, Spain, France, which was a huge dilemma. It was just the case that these companies from these countries don't focus on the local market at all. They just focus on global markets. Hence, it's easier for them to build unicorns. While the German competitor, the French competitor is trying to conquer the local market, the Estonian competitor, a company would be, I don't know, Wise or Skype, is executing it globally. And we tried to build this population paradox dilemma to more mid-market countries like Turkey, like Romania. And as the local economy and the currency hasn't been doing that well for the past 5 years, we saw more and more entrepreneurs to act more like Israeli or Estonian entrepreneurs. They target global markets from the get-go. Hence, that's why we try to invest into blue ocean companies so that they go for global markets from the get-go. We created our own population paradox where although there is the population, here it's 85 million people, our entrepreneurs behave as if there's no population here, and they just target US or Western Europe from the start. And these entrepreneurs that we back, we call them the Renaissance entrepreneurs because they become the first success stories from the region. They become the first success stories. They inspire a lot of people to become entrepreneurs themselves, which starts a big flywheel in the ecosystem. And PayPal Mafia is a good example of what has happened. There were probably 15 different new companies that emerged from ex-PayPal employees, which includes YouTube, LinkedIn, Tesla, Square, etc. And we saw something similar happen with Skype. We saw something similar happen with Peak Games in Turkey. So through these Renaissance entrepreneurs, we're trying to spin the flywheel, start the multiplier effect, and have more companies, more entrepreneurs even come out of the ecosystem. Eren is a good example of that because he built Udemy back in the day. Udemy IPO'd last summer. It's $1 billion company. He then went on to build Carbon Health, which also became a unicorn. And when we look into the investments that we did back in 2016, 2018, we had 3 entrepreneurs that came out of Udemy to become entrepreneurs themselves. And that just shows us how the multiplier effect is coming in place, much like what happened with PayPal 20 years ago in the US. Lastly, in terms of exits, the way we look into exits is in 4 folds. That why would a company acquire another company? And we feel there are 4 reasons. A, it can be an acqui-hire. These are not the best acquisitions. These are more companies buying a company just for its team. These are M&A as an HR strategy for talent. You don't make a lot of money as a VC, but you just take your money back maybe with a couple multiple. The second is product plus team, and a good example is Firebase, Google, or Parse, Facebook, etc., where companies buy a company, they want the team to stay, but they're also letting the product live in and of itself as well. These are a bit more lucrative for the VCs. The third one would be expansion, and this can be either in form of a segment, geography, or channel. If it's a segment expansion, this is a company that's trying to, if you're an enterprise SaaS and you're buying a company that does SME SaaS, that's a segment expansion. You're trying to go below the segment. And instead of you building a product, you actually buy a company that already owns that segment. Similarly, geography. If you're trying to enter a new market, if you're Alibaba and you want to enter Turkey, you buy Trendyol, and that's a geography acquisition. And the third would be a channel acquisition, where if you're Walmart, you buy Jet.com because as Walmart, you are the king of offline, but you don't have great channels online. So you buy a company that's great at online. That's a channel acquisition. This expansion acquisitions are the third ways of acquisitions, and you make a lot of money. But the best, like home runs, are the ones where you existentially threaten a company, and this company that you threaten has to buy you with thousands of multiples. So WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Google are such examples where these companies became an existential threat for these huge technology giants. And the only way out for Facebook to stay big was to buy WhatsApp and Instagram. Think of Facebook today without Instagram and WhatsApp, it would probably be 1/10 the size. Obviously, in any investment we make, we're looking to see which company are we going to existentially threaten, so that becomes our North Star metric. But if we can't do that, for whatever reason, we can't get to that stage, as a product and team acquisition, who would buy us and what? As an expansion acquisition, who would buy us and why? So we try to map this in our investment thesis. And if you look into our investment committee memos, you would see that depending on the stage of the company, whether in terms of revenue or number of users or number of customers, we're trying to lay out what kind of, which categories of companies might acquire us at what multiples or at what valuations. And we do this exercise in every investment that we make. I guess that was it for the whole presentation. So if you guys have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Well, that was a lot of information to cram in. Thanks for this. It's very enlightening, and most of the stuff sometimes we don't even think about. We are aware of it, but we just don't realize it.
Yeah, a lot of like becoming a VC is trying to do pattern matching. We try to build frameworks that matches the patterns that we've seen. And then you're like, and then a unicorn comes out, which doesn't fit any of the patterns that you've previously built. So you start building another pattern on top of it. The more you miss investing in unicorns, the more patterns you try to build so that you lay down the framework and the decision-making within the team.
Awesome. Guys, any questions?
Hello, Enis. Yes,
Hi.
I do. Hi.
Hi,
I have a question. Hello, how are you?
It's not bad.
Yes, I have a question. You said in the beginning of the presentation about the team, how important it is, and how important it is, especially when you are talking about blue ocean companies and blue ocean strategies. I'm going to give you my example. I'm founding a company, and it's a blue ocean, and it's a very specialized market. And I have two ways. The first one is to have an angel investor or invest the first round by myself. And the second way is to go straight to the VCs, because it's a product that needs a lot of money to build the first time. So I don't have how to build it small. How do you see it in the eyes of venture capital investment? Because it's not an angel, it's not early stage. It's like it's a round, like.
I would always say if you're. So why do you get financing, right? That's the initial question. Why would a company get financing? The companies who are trying to accelerate how the time passes get funding. You try to accelerate because A, you want to build the product faster, B, you want to go to market faster, C, you want to penetrate the market faster, right? So I think if you're in such an urgency where you think today is the right time and tomorrow is going to be too late, if you're in such a category, and by saying that you're in blue ocean, that's what you mean. You mean that today is critical, 2 years down the line might be too late. Then I would say go fundraise. And in today's liquidity and funding environment, I think a good entrepreneur is able to get a couple $1 million in pre-seed financing, even with just an idea, sometimes even without the idea. So what we see is invest on idea stages, we have to fall in love with the problem. We have to fall in love with the team. So it's less so about the solution definition. It's less so about the go-to-market strategy, etc. To me, it's more about problem and the founding team. So I tried to stick myself to it. And initially, when I started investing 7 years ago as an angel investor, my initial line of thought was team is the most important thing, but all these other things are important as well. And over time, it's shifted to a way where like I'm basing my decision on the team and I'm doing all the rest just as a red flag review. So all the other things that I do wouldn't get me from 0 to 1. They might get me from 1 to 0, but what's going to get me from 0 to 1 is team and team alone. So that makes you more comfortable to invest a couple million in an idea stage company because you're bullish on the team. So if you want to accelerate time and you think today is the right time, tomorrow is too late, I would go fundraise. But while fundraising, it becomes it's not fun to fundraise. Plus, it takes a lot of time. So you have to put in these hacks so that you don't spend all of your time trying to fundraise from investors. So I would say don't do more than 2 meetings. After a meeting, try to get an answer. Always get a binary answer. So don't let the VC say, okay, we'll get back to you in 2 months, or oh, let us know when you have traction, or let us know when you have a lead investor. So all of these answers which are not 0 or 1 should be treated as zeros. Which is what we advise to our portfolio companies as well. The goal is to get an answer. That is not to get a yes, it's to get an answer. Is more important because a lot of the times VCs don't give an answer. They don't say 0, they don't say 1. They find this third answer, which is just ballparking you so that they get a couple of updates from you every couple of weeks. That's the position you don't want to be in. You'd rather get a 0 than a 2.
Oh, thank you very much. Very important, your answer. And may I ask another question? How do you see, like in the same situation, going further, about single founders, because I know, I have a specialization. I have a product that I'm developing for the last like 4 years, and I have a co-founder in a small percentage, and but I don't have a CTO now because my product, it doesn't need like one of the characteristics of my product is a marketplace, but the technology has become a commodity in that in the kind of product I will develop. And how do you see it, like the percentage of the partners, and how do you see like a single founder as an investor?
Yeah, so I'm hearing two questions here. One of them around being a solo founder, and the other one about like building the product for 4 years and the momentum or lack thereof. So starting with solo founders, VCs don't do a lot of solo founder investments, but they do. For example, we did 10 investments over the last year. One of them was a solo founder. But as you invest into the solo founder, you have to make sure that he or she is able to build a really strong leadership team. So a lot of the solo founders who are successful are able to build these leadership teams over time, where we invest into more mature solo founders, whereas more immature equal split teams are also important. So a lot of the solo founders that you would see out there in the market are much more mature compared to non-solo founders. From a momentum perspective, like you building the product yourself for the past 4 years, it's good in terms of grit and perseverance because you've been there, you are doing it, there's no question into that. But it brings question marks around urgency, because why did you wait for 4 years before fundraising? Was 4 years ago too early? Do you think now is the right time? Then why? What happened in 2022 that makes you feel like there's an inflection compared to 2021 or 2020? So a lot, like I would say 95% of VC investments are momentum investments, where you're betting on the momentum of the person, either from a career perspective or from a company perspective. And only 5% of them are more inflection stories, where something that was slow before is going to go fast tomorrow. Like UiPath, which is a $30 billion something company right now. That was a good example of an inflection betting, where the company was around for 10 years, didn't pick up, didn't become a startup, but 2016, 2015 was the right time to do it. So yes, it happens, but a lot of the times VCs would raise eyebrows and say, why haven't you fundraised in the past 4 years? Wouldn't you rather fundraise 4 years ago so that you would be in a different position right now? If your answer is like, oh, now is the right time, then why? Why wasn't 2019 the right time?
Oh, perfect. Yes, in my case, it was because of the pandemic. It did accelerate a lot of things that makes my project feasible to launch. That's the only reason.
Yeah.
Oh, but thank you very much.
I have a quick question. Basically, I mean, we know about the market turbulence, especially looking into NASDAQ. It came from like 16,800 to, around like 13,000 as it trades. So in this environment, what is your approach to to your investments, and how do you prevent overpaying?
First of all, I try not to care about public markets at all. Although the end of our value chain is the public markets, as I've said, we invest in companies who are either going to IPO or get acquired by companies who have IPO'd, or get acquired by companies who are going to get acquired by companies who are going to go IPO. I know that the end of the value chain is the public markets, but this is a 10-year fund, right? In a 10-year life cycle, these things happen 3-4 times. Even in the most stable environment like the UK, in a 10-year life cycle, you have the 2008 crisis, and then you have the Brexit happening, and that's the most stable country in the world, arguably. So from that frame of thought, in a 10-year unliquid cold asset, you shouldn't be affected by these turbulences, or you shouldn't change your strategy depending on these turbulences, because you don't know what's going to happen 6 to 8 years from now, which is when our companies are going to mature. When I started VC investing 2015, 2016, SaaS multiples were going down. In fact, they went down from like 13x average to like 8x average. And everyone was like, SaaS is going down, SaaS is going down. What happened over the next 4 years? SaaS multiples went all the way up to 20x. And now going down to 13x again is like, oh, technology is done, it's going down again. So if you try to strategize, I think that's the wrong metric you're optimizing. So the only thing that we're optimizing for is great founders. And I'm much more okay overpaying a great founder than paying the right price for a mediocre founder, because we're only betting on outlier returns, right? And outlier returns, you don't expect extraordinary results from ordinary people. Extraordinary results can only come from extraordinary people. So I don't think overpaying is a problem, but I'm speaking as a pre-seed investor. If I was a Series B investor with a 5-year fund life cycle where I invest and I try to liquidate in the next 3 years, then that would become much of an issue. The way I see NASDAQ today is I only look at it for our fund 1. So I'm trying for it to not change my focus or our strategy for fund 2. But in fund 1, 80%, and currently we're at above 5x in fund 1, and probably 4x of that is in 3 companies which are unicorns, right? So they get affected. And obviously that 5x can go down to 4x, 3.5x, God knows. So only those 3 companies, I try to assess my position to see whether we should sell or not. So I try to look at my strategy today in fund 1 because it's a 6-7-year-old fund and it changed. I mean, I don't have that much time left, but for fund 2, as a pre-seed investor over the next 10 years, I mean, things can change 5 times, right? And if you try to optimize for today, you are unoptimizing for tomorrow.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Nice.
I think this is pretty much all the questions from our international homegrown people.
I have one last question.
Okay.
So Enes, in the years you've been involved with VC, what's the biggest risk you've taken and what did you learn from it?
Risk. So I had this fund 1 learnings 1-pager where like, okay, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. One of them was don't take product risk. So meaning if it's a solo founder without technical expertise, it's much more of a risk than I actually anticipated. And we did like 2-3 times. So now we try to not do that at all. So there has to be a product technology co-founder in place before we invest. We can't bet on the fact that he or she is gonna actually build that. The second thing is, I think, sometimes you build conviction into a market, and although you see all these red flags within the team, you try to not see them. You try to unsee them because you're bullish on the market. If you're bullish on this one market and you want to take a bet, go to NASDAQ, buy whatever company you think is taking a bet onto this market. But for us now, team became the only important thing. So as I've said, I try to not even think about the product before giving an investing decision or the market or the competitive landscape, and then fill those gaps after I've already given my decision. So those would be the 2 things from a big mistake team perspective. The third would be it's funny how like in Turkey, there weren't a lot of companies that we missed. I'd say there are like 2-3 companies that we missed to invest and they became big. In Eastern Europe, that number is like 10. Whatever company we didn't invest became a unicorn. I can tell you that. And hindsight, when I go back, I'm like, why didn't we invest into this? We had the access. We had like 3-5 times calls. We ended up not pulling the trigger. It's because us being from Turkey and not being present there and only having a tiny portion of our fund there, it was tough to build conviction on a person-to-person level. That's granted. But also it's because of the experts that we talked with. So in fintech is a good example. We had one company in AI, which became a unicorn. In all of these cases, we had these experts calls where the experts by nature are pessimists. They're naysayers. They tell you all the ways why a company is not going to be successful. I shut my ears. I don't care what the experts say. If the experts knew a lot, they wouldn't be hourly rated experts. That's my frame of thought from now on, because entrepreneurs, by contrast, are overly optimistic people. And only with that overly optimistic worldview, you can say that you're going to build $1 billion company in 5 years. To claim that, you have to be an overly optimistic person. So to build conviction in these Eastern European companies, I think we overweighted experts' opinions. Hence, we missed maybe like 3 or 4 unicorns where we had conviction, but experts told us all these ways why it's not going to happen. But as a VC, your only goal is to look for ways how it can happen. And even if it's a slim chance, even if it's a 1 to 10% chance, if there's a way of that happening, you shouldn't care about the 90% chance that it's not going to happen because it's irrelevant.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, Enes, thank you very much for your enlightening information. This was quite a lot of stuff to pack in, and I have to admit, you are a fast speaker, man. I don't think we will be able to get through this in the time we did.
Man, so, it's because of the podcasts. It's because of listening to podcasts at 1.5x speed. It makes you speak fast.
Well, that worked apparently. But anyway, thank you very much for being with us here, and thank you for all the information. And I would like to ask one question. when you remove, if there's any confidential or sensitive stuff on the slides, if you remove that, can you share it with us so we can send it to people who might ask?
Of course, it's not the best slides. They're like weird logos everywhere, but I'd be happy to share them.
It's fine. I mean, if there's like a term sheet, as in like, you know, there's like what was it called? Acronyms. So if there's like an explanation for acronyms and stuff, can you also tag that in, and then
Of course.
we can distribute that to people who may ask for it. But thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who joined us today on the second series of what we had today. And next week on the 9th of May, we have the next part of our series on the third series, which again will start at 4:30 Central Eastern European time. And this is going to be about navigating team sheets for investors. Now that's bit more technical, but that is nonetheless very also highly essential part of doing investments. And so hopefully see you next time. And thank you for joining us. Thanks a
Take
lot.
care, everyone.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much. I appreciate it, Enes. It was great.
Thank you so much. Great session.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very
Have a
much,
good weekend.
Enes. Thank you.
İyi bayramlar herkese.
Bye-bye.
Bayramlar.
Bayramlar.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.